So, hello and welcome back yet again to our second evening of a very dense and very hopefully good book. I'm I'm still not sure. This is a very dense book. It seems very political from the very first chapter, but it bills itself as a romance. I haven't seen any romance yet, but I'm gonna hold out hope that there's some romance in here. And maybe some knights and possibly some chivalry or something like that, along with anything else that could potentially be in Sir Walter Scott's Ivanhoe. But before we jump into that today, I'm going to do something that I rarely do, which is a little bit of self promotion. If you are missing some of the content that I removed from YouTube, hint, hint, hint. Um, I was finally talked into opening a Patreon. It's gonna take a while to get everything transferred over to Patreon, but slowly but surely, I already have the first 6 videos from hint, 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 and I'm gonna slowly get everything that I had to take down transferred over there. There could also be other videos that go up on there, and maybe even some read-throughs of some other stuff that can't go on YouTube anymore. I think it will work out there. I was really reluctant to open a Patreon because I like the fact that YouTube is free, and I hate asking people to pay. But it is over there if you are interested. I put a link in my channel page to the Patreon, and in the future, maybe we'll add a higher tier. I kept it, I think, fairly low. I don't know. I don't know anything about Patreon. I don't know anything about self-promotion, but it's there if you're interested. I will link it also in the doobly-doo down below here. But oh, there are people coming in the door. Oh my gosh. Um, but yeah, it is now linked. So if you're interested, it's like I said, it's in the link on my channel page, like the actual channel page. And I'll try and make sure that it is linked in the doobly-doo down below every video. If you're interested, it is there. So I guess that's about it for that sort of business. So now it's time to jump back into Ivanhoe, which is going to be opening with a quote from Chaucer. Interesting. Anyway, this is chapter 2 of Ivanhoe by Sir Walter Scott. And here we go. A monk there was, a fair for the maestry, an outrider that loved venerie, a manly man to be an abbot able, full many a dainty horse had he in stable, and when he rode, men might his bridle hear, jingling in a whistling wind as clear, and eke as loud as doth the chapel bell, there as this lord was keeper of cell. Yep, we're just going to go with that. Was very dense, and that was Chaucer. Now, on to chapter 2 of Ivanhoe. Notwithstanding the occasional exhortation and chiding of his companion, the noise of the horsemen's feet continuing to approach Wamba could not be prevented from lingering occasionally on the road, upon every pretense which occurred, now catching from the hazel a cluster of half-ripe nuts, and now turning his head to leer after a cottage maiden who crossed their path. The horsemen, therefore, soon overtook them on the road. Their numbers amounted to 10 men, of whom the 2 who rode in the front seemed to be persons of considerable importance, and the others were their attendants. It was not difficult to ascertain the condition and character of one of these personages. He was obviously an ecclesiastic of a high rank. His dress was that of a Cistercian monk, but composed of materials much finer than those which the rule of that order admitted. His mantle and hood were of the best Flanders cloth, and fell in ample and not ungraceful folds around a handsome, though somewhat corpulent person. His countenance bore as little the marks of self-denial as his habit indicated the contempt of worldly splendor. His features might have been called good, had there not lurked under the penthouse of his eye that sly Epicurean twinkle which indicates the cautious voluptuary. In other respects, his profession and situation had taught him a ready command over his countenance, which he could contract at pleasure into solemnness, although its natural expression was that of a good-humored social indulgence. In defiance of the conventional rules and edicts of posts and councils, the sleeves of this dignitary were lined and turned up with rich furs, his mantle secured at the throat with a golden clasp, and the whole dress proper to his order, as much refined upon and ornamented as that of a Quaker beauty of present day, who, while she retains the garb and costume of her sect, continues to give to its simplicity, by the choice of materials and mode of disposing them, a certain air of coquettish attraction, savoring but too much of the vanities of this world. This worthy churchman rode upon a well-fed, ambling mule, whose furniture was highly decorated, and whose bridle, according to the fashion of the day, was ornamented with silver bells. In his seat he had nothing of the awkwardness of the convent, but displayed the easy and habitual grace of a well-trained horseman. Indeed, it seemed that so humble a conveyance as a mule, in however good case, and however well broken to a pleasant and accommodating amble, was only to be used by the gallant monk for traveling on the road. A lay brother, one of those who followed in the train, had for his use on other occasions one of the most handsome Spanish jennets ever bred in Andalusia, which merchants used at that time to import with great trouble and risk, for the exclusive use of persons of wealth and distinction. The saddle and housings of this superb palfrey were covered by a foot-long cloth, which reached nearly to the ground, and on which were richly embroidered mitres, crosses, and other ecclesiastical emblems. Another lay brother led a sumpter mule, loaded probably with his superior's baggage, and two monks of his own order, of inferior station, rode together in the rear, laughing and conversing with each other, without taking much notice of the other members of the cavalcade. The companion of the church dignitary was a man past 40, thin, strong, and well-muscled, an athletic figure, which long fatigue and constant exercise seemed to have left none of the softer parts of the human form, having reduced the whole to brawn, bone, and sinew, which had sustained 1,000 toils, and were ready to dare 1,000 more. His head was covered in a scarlet cap, faced with fur of the kind which the French call mortier, for its resemblance to the shape of an inverted mortar. His countenance was therefore fully displayed, and its expression was calculated to impress a degree of awe, if not fear, on strangers. High features, naturally strong and powerfully expressive, had been burnt almost into blackness by constant exposure to the tropical sun, and might in their ordinary state be said to slumber after the storm of passions had passed away. But the projection of the veins of the forehead, the readiness with which the upper lip and its thick black mustaches quivered upon the slightest emotion, plainly intimated that the tempest might easily awaken again. His keen, piercing dark eyes told in every glance a history of difficulties subdued and dangers dared, and they seemed to challenge opposition to his wishes for the pleasure of sweeping from it his road by a determinate exertion of courage of will. A deep scar on his brow gave additional sternness to his face, and a sinister expression to one of his eyes, which had been slightly injured upon that occasion, and of which the vision, though perfect, was in a slight and partial degree distorted. The upper dress of this personage resembled that of his companion in shape, being a long monastic mantle, but the color being scarlet showed that he did not belong to any of the four regular orders of monks. On the right shoulder of the mantle there was cut in white cloth a cross of a peculiar form. The upper robe concealed what at first view seemed rather inconsistent with its form, a shirt, namely of linked mail, with sleeves and gloves of the same, curiously braided and interwoven, as flexible to the body as those which are now wrought in the stocking loom out of less obdurate materials. The forepart of his thighs, where the folds of his mantle permitted them to be seen, were also covered with linked mail. The knees and feet were defended by splints or thin plates of steel ingeniously joined upon each other, and mail hose reaching from the ankle to the knee effectually protected the legs and completed the rider's defensive armor. In his girdle he wore a long and double-edged dagger, which was the only offensive weapon on his person. He rode not a mule like his companion, but a strong hackney for the road, to save his gallant war horse, which a squire led behind, fully dressed for battle, with a chamfram or plated headpiece upon its head, having a short spike projecting from the front. On one side of the saddle hung a short battle axe, richly inlaid with Damascus carving, and on the other the rider's plumed headpiece and hood of mail, with a long two-handed sword used by the chivalry of the period. A second squire held aloft his master's lance, from the extremity of which fluttered a small banderole or streamer, bearing a cross of the same form as that embroidered upon his cloak. He also carried the knight's small triangular shield, broad enough at the top to protect the breast, and from thence diminishing to a point. It was covered with a red cloth, which prevented the device from being seen. These two squires were followed by two attendants, whose dark faces, white turbans, and form of their garments showed them to be natives of some distant eastern country. The whole appearance of this warrior and his retinue was wild and outlandish. The dress of his squires was gorgeous, and his attendants wore silver collars around their throats and bracelets of the same metal upon their legs and arms, the latter of which were naked from the elbow, and the former from mid-leg to ankle. Silk embroidery distinguished their dresses and marked the wealth and importance of their master, forming at the same time a striking contrast with the martial simplicity of his own attire. They were armed with crooked sabers, having hilt and baldric inlaid with gold, and matched with Turkish daggers of yet even more costly workmanship. Each of them bore at his saddle bow a bundle of darts or javelins, about 4 feet in length, having sharp steel heads. It was a weapon much in use among the Saracens, and of which the memory is yet preserved in the martial exercise called El Jerid, still practiced in the eastern countries. The steeds of these attendants were in appearance as foreign as their riders. They were of Saracen origin, and consequently of Arabian descent, and their fine, slender limbs, Small fetlocks, thin manes, and easy springy motion formed a marked contrast with the large jointed heavy horses of which the race was cultivated in Flanders and Normandy for mounting men-at-arms of the period with all the pamphily of plate and mail, and which, placed by the side of these eastern horses, might have passed for the personification of substance versus shadow. The singular appearance of this cavalcade not only attracted the curiosity of Wamba, but excited even that of his less volatile companion. The monk he instantly knew to be the prior of the Jorvaulx Abbey, well known for many miles around as a lover of the chase and of the banquet, and, if fame did not wrong him, of other worldly pleasures still more inconsistent with his monastic vows. Yet so loose were the ideas of the times respecting the conduct of the clergy, whether secular or regular, that the prior Emir maintained a good character in the neighborhood of his abbey. His free and jovial temper, and the readiness with which he granted absolution from all ordinary delinquencies, rendered him a favorite among the nobility and the principal gentry, to several of whom he was allied by birth, being from a distinguished Norman family. The ladies, in particular, were not disposed to scan too nicely the morals of a man who was a professed admirer of their sex, and who possessed many means for dispelling the ennui which was far too apt to intrude upon the halls and bowers of an ancient castle. The prior mingled in the sports of the field with more than a due eagerness, and he was allowed to possess the best trained hawks and the fleetest greyhounds in North Riding, circumstances which recommended him to the youthful gentry. With the old, he had another part to play, which, when needed, he could sustain with great decorum. His knowledge of books, however superficial, was enough to impress upon their ignorance respect for his supposed learning, and the gravity of his deportment and language, with the high tone which he exerted in setting forth the authority of the church and that of the priesthood, impressed them no less with an opinion of his sanctity. Even the common people, the severest critics of the conduct of their betters, had commiseration with the follies of the prior. He was generous, and his charity is as well known. It covered a multitude of his sins, in another sense than that which had to do with anything in the scripture. The revenues of the monastery, of which a large part was at his disposal, while they gave him the means of supplying his own considerable expenses, afforded also the largesse that he bestowed among the peasantry, and with which he frequently relieved the distresses of the oppressed. If Prior Aymer rode hard in the chase, or remained long at the banquet, if Prior Aymer was seen at the early peep of dawn to enter the postern of the abbey as he glided home from some rendezvous which had occupied the hours of darkness, men just shrugged up their shoulders and reconciled themselves to his irregularities by remembering that the same was practiced by many of his brethren who had no redeeming qualities whatsoever. Prior Aymer, therefore, and his character were well known to our Saxon serfs, who made their rude bows and received his benedicte, mes filles, in return. But the singular appearance of his companion and attendants arrested their attention and excited their wonder, and they could scarcely pay any attention to the prior of Jorvaulx's question when he demanded to know if they knew of any place of harborage in the vicinity. So much were they surprised at the half-monastic, half-military appearance of the swarthy stranger and the uncouth dress of his eastern attendants. It is probable, too, that the language in which the benediction was conferred and the information asked sounded ungracious, though not unintelligible, in the ears of these Saxon peasants. "I asked you, my children," said the prior, raising his voice, and using the lingua franca, or mixed language in which the Normans and Saxons spoke to each other, "if there be in this neighborhood any good man who, for the love of God and devotion to the church, will give 2 of her humblest servants, along with their retinue, a night's hospitality and refreshment." This he spoke with a tone of conscious importance, which formed a strong contrast to the modest terms which he thought it proper to use. "2 of the humblest servants of the Mother Church," said Wamba to himself. But fool as he was, he took care not to make this observation audible. "I should like to see her seneschals, her chief butlers, and her other principal domestics." After this internal commentary on the prior's speech, he raised his eyes and replied to the question he had been put. "If the reverend fathers," he said, "loved good cheer and soft lodging, a few miles of riding would carry them to the priory of Brinksworth, where their quality could not but secure them the most honorable reception. Or if they preferred spending a penitential evening, they might turn down yonder wild glade, which would bring them to the hermitage of Coppenhurst, where a pious anchoret would make them sharers for a night of the shelter of his roof and the benefit of his prayer." The prior shook his head at both proposals. "Mine honest friend," he said, "if the jangling of thy bells had not dizzied thine understanding, thou mightest know clericus clericum non demicat. That is to say, we churchmen do not exhaust each other's hospitality, but rather require that one of the laity, giving them thus an opportunity to serve God in honoring and relieving his servants, would be of benefit." "It is true," said Wamba, "that I, being but an ass, am nevertheless honored to bear the bells as well as your reverence's mule notwithstanding. I did conceive that the charity of the Mother Church and her servants might be said, with other charity, to begin at home." "A truce to your insolence, my fellow," said the armed rider, breaking in on his prattle with a high, stern voice, "and tell us, if thou canst, the road to— how called you your Franklin, Prior Aymer?" "Cedric," said the prior, "Cedric the Saxon. Tell me, good fellow, are we near his dwelling? Can you show us the road?" "The road will be uneasy to find," said Gurth, who now spoke for the first time, "and the family of Cedric retire early." "Tush! Tell me not, dear fellow," said the military man. "'Tis easy for them to arise and supply the wants of travelers such as we, who will not stoop to beg the hospitality which we have a right to command." "I don't know," said Gurth, "if I should show the way to my master's house to those who demand a right to the shelter, who most are fain to ask for a favor." "Do you dispute with me, slave?" said the soldier, and setting spurs to his horse, he caused him to make a demi-volte across the path, raising at the same time a riding rod which he held in his hand, with a purpose of chastising what he considered the insolence of this peasant. Gurth darted at him a savage and revengeful scowl, and with a fierce yet hesitating motion laid his hand on the haft of his knife. But the interference of Prior Aymer, who pushed his mule between his companion and the swineherd, prevented any violence. Nay, by Saint Mary, brother Brian, you must not think that you are now in Palestine, predominating over the heathen Turks and the infidel Saracens. We islanders love not blows, save that of the Holy Church, who chastens that she loves. Tell me, my good fellow, he said to Wamba, and seconded his speech by a small piece of silver, the way to Cedric the Saxton's. You cannot be ignorant of it, and it is your duty to direct the wanderer, even when his character is less sanctified than ours. In truth, venerable father, said the jester, the Saracen head of your right reverend companion has frightened out of mine my way home. I'm not sure I will get there tonight myself. Hush, said the abbot. Thou canst tell us if thou wilt. This reverend brother has been all his life engaged in fighting among the Saracens for the recovery of the Holy Sepulchre. He is of the order of the Knights Templar, who you may have heard of. He is half a monk and half a soldier. If he's half a monk, said the jester, he should not be wholly unreasonable with those who he meets upon the road, even if they should be in no hurry to answer the questions that in no way concern them. I will forgive thy wit, said the abbot, on condition thou wilt show me the way to Cedric's mansion. Well then, said Wamba, your reverences must hold on this path until you come to a sunken cross, of which scarce a cubit's length remains above the ground, and then take the path to the left. There are 4 which meet at the sunken cross, and I trust your reverences will obtain shelter before the storm hits. The abbot thanked his sage adviser, and the cavalcade, setting spurs to their horses, rode on as men do who wish to reach their inn before the bursting of a night storm. As the horses' hoofs died away, Gurth said to his companion, if they follow thy wise direction, the reverend fathers will hardly reach Rotherford this night. No, said the jester with a grin, but they may reach Sheffield if they have good luck, and as that is a fit place for them, I am not so bad a woodsman as to show the dog where the deer lies, and I have no mind should he chase them. Thou art right, said Gurth. It were ill that Aymer saw the Lady Rowena, and it were worse, it may be, for Cedric to quarrel, as likely he would with this military monk. But like good servants, let us hear, see, and say nothing. And now we return to the riders, who had soon left the bondsman far behind them, and who maintained the following conversation in the Norman French language usually employed by the upper classes, with the exception of the few who were still inclined to boast of their Saxon descent. What mean these fellows by their capricious insolence? Said the Templar to the Cistercian. And why did you prevent me from chastising it? Marry, brother Brian, said the prior, touching the one of them, it were hard for me to render a reason for a fool speaking according to his folly, and the other churl is that of savage, fierce, intractable race, some of whom, as I have often told you, are still to be found among the descendants of the Saxtons, and whose supreme pleasure is to testify, by all means in their power, their aversion to our conquerors. I would as soon beat him into courtesy, said Brian. I am accustomed to dealing with such spirits. Our Turkish captives are as fierce, as intractable as Odin himself could have been. Yet 2 months in my household, under the management of my master of slaves, has made them humble, submissive, serviceable, and observant of my will. Marry, sir, you must beware of the poison and the dagger, for they use either with a free will when you give them the slightest chance. "Ay, but," said Prior Aymer, "every land has its own manners and fashions, and besides, that beating this fellow could procure us no information respecting the road to Cedric's house. It would have been sure to have established a quarrel betwixt you and him had we found our way thither. Remember what I told you. This wealthy Franklin is proud, fierce, jealous, and irritable, a withstander of the nobility, and even of his neighbors, Reginald Front de Bœuf and Philip Malvision, who are no babies to strive with. He stands up so sternly for the privilege of his race, and is so proud of his uninterrupted descent from Hereward, a renowned champion of the Heptarchy, that he is universally called Cedric the Saxon, and he makes a boast of his belonging to a people from whom many others endeavor to hide their descent from, lest they should encounter a share of the Vevictus, or severities imposed upon the vanquished. "Prior Aymer," said the Templar, "you are a man of gallantry, and learned in the study of beauty, and as expert a troubadour in all matters concerning the arrêts of love. But I shall expect much beauty in the celebrated Rowena to countenance the self-denial and forbearance which I must exert if I am to court the favor of such a churl as you have described her father Cedric." "Cedric is not her father," said the prior, "and is of but remote relation. She is descended from higher blood than even he pretends to, and is but distantly connected with him by birth. Her guardian, however, he is self-constituted, as I believe, but his ward is as dear to him as if she were his own child. Of her beauty you shall soon be judge, and if the purity of her complexion, and the majestic yet soft expression of a mild blue eye, do not chase from your memory the black-haired girls of Palestine, or the Oris of old Mahoud's paradise, then I am an infidel, and not a true son of the church." "Should your boasted beauty," said the Templar, "be weighed in balance and found wanting, you remember our wager." "My golden collar," said the prior, "against 10 butts of chain wine. They are mine as securely as if they were already in the convent vaults, under the key of old Dennis the cellarer." "And I myself to be the judge?" said the Templar. "And I am only to be convicted on my own admission that I have seen no maiden so beautiful since Pentecost was a 12-month. Was that not it? Prior, your collar is in danger. I will wear it over my gorget on the lists of Ashley de la Zouche." "Win it fairly," said the prior, "and wear it ye will. I will trust your giving true response upon your word as a knight and a churchman. Yet, brother, take my advice, and file your tongue to a little more courtesy than your habits of predominating over infidel captives and Eastern bondsmen have grown you used to. Cedric the Saxon, if offended, he is in no way slack in taking offense. He is a man who, without respect to your knighthood, my office, or the sanctity of either, would clear his house of us, and send us to lodge with the larks, even if it were midnight. Also be careful how you look upon Rowena, who he cherishes with jealous care, lest he take an alarm in that quarter. We are lost men. It is said he banished his only son from his family for lifting his eyes in the way of affection to this beauty, who may be worshipped, it seems, only at a distance, not to be approached with other thoughts than such as we bring to the shrine of the Blessed Virgin." "Well, you've said enough," the Templar said. "I will, for a night, put upon me the needful restraint, and deport as meekly as a maiden. But as for the fear of his expelling us by violence, Myself and my squires, with Hamet and Abdullah, will warrant you against that disgrace. Doubt not that we shall be strong enough to make good our quarters." "We must not let it come so far," said the prior. "But here is the clown's sunken cross, and the night so dark that we can hardly see which road to follow. He told us, I believe, to turn left." "I thought he said the right," said Brian. "To the left, certainly the left. I remember his pointing with his wooden sword." "Yeah, but he held his sword in his left hand, and so he pointed across his body with it," said the Templar. Each of them maintained his opinion with sufficient obstinacy, but as usual in all these cases, the attendants were appealed to, but they had not been close enough to hear Wamba's directions. Finally, Brian remarked what had at first escaped him in the twilight. "Here is someone, either asleep or lying dead at the foot of this cross. Hugo, stir him with the butt end of thine lance." This was no sooner done than the figure arose, exclaiming in good French, "Whosoever thou art, it is discourteous that you disturb my thoughts." "We did but wish to ask you," said the prior, "the road to Rotherwood, the abode of Cedric the Saxton." "I myself am going that way," said the stranger, "and if I had a horse I would be your guide, for the way is somewhat intricate, though perfectly well known to me." "Then thou shalt have both thanks and reward, my friend," said the prior, "if thou wilt bring us to Cedric's in safety." And he caused one of his attendants to mount his own led horse, and gave that upon which he had hitherto ridden to the stranger, who was to be their guide. Their conductor pursued an opposite road from that which Wamba had recommended for the purpose of misleading them. Their path soon led deep into the woodland, and crossed more than one brook, the approach to which was rendered perilous by the marshes through which it flowed, but the stranger seemed to know, as though by instinct, the best ground and the safest points of passage, and by dint of caution and attention he brought the party safely into a wider avenue than any they had yet seen, and pointing to a large, low, irregular building at the upper extremity, he said, "Yonder is Rotherwood, the dwelling of Cedric the Saxton." This was a joyful intimation to Prior Aymer, whose nerves were not the strongest, and who had suffered such agitation and alarm in the course of passing through the dangerous bogs, that he had not yet had the curiosity to ask his guide a single question. Finding himself now at his ease and near shelter, his curiosity awakened, and he demanded of the guide who and what he was. "A palmer, just returned from the Holy Land," came the answer. "You should have tarried there, and fought for the recovery of the Holy Sepulchre," said the Templar. "True, reverend Sir Knight," said the palmer, to whom the appearance of the Templar seemed perfectly familiar. "But when those who are under oath to recover the Holy City are found traveling at such a distance from the scene of their duties, can you wonder that a peaceful peasant like me should decline the task that they have abandoned?" The Templar would have made an angry reply, but he was interrupted by the prior, who once again expressed his astonishment that their guide, after such long absence, should be perfectly well acquainted with this forest. "I was born a native of these parts," said their guide. And as he made the reply, they stood before the mansion of Cedric, a low, irregular building containing several courtyards or enclosures extending over a considerable space of ground, and which, through its size, argued the inhabitant to be a person of wealth. It differed entirely, though, from the tall, turreted, and castellated buildings in which the Norman nobility resided, and which had become the universal style of architecture all through England. Rotherwood was not, however, without its defenses. No habitation in that disturbed period could have been so without the risk of being plundered and burned by the next morning. A deep fosse, or ditch, was drawn round the whole building and filled with water from the neighboring stream. A double stockade, or palisade, composed of pointed beams which the adjacent forest supplied, defended the outer and inner bank of this trench. There was an entry from the west through the outer stockade, which communicated by a drawbridge with a similar opening in the interior defense. Some precautions had been taken to place those entrances under the protection of projecting angles by which they might be flanked in case of need by archers or slingers. And before this entrance, the Templar wound his horn loudly, for the rain, which had been long threatening, now began to descend upon them all with great violence. And that is the end of chapter 2, which I must say I preferred to chapter 1. It was still dense, but at least we got some good descriptions and we've got some interesting intrigue. It seems like this abbot or prior, I'm assuming a prior is like the head monk, has a bet with a knight from the Knights Templar about a girl's beauty. Interesting. Anyway, that's where we're going to leave it. That actually went a lot longer than I was expecting it to. I hope that you enjoyed this chapter, and I will see you. Oh yeah, and if you're interested, please do hit the thumbs up, because that always makes me smile. And if you're interested in anything else, just check out the Patreon if you want to. No pressure, but I will see you guys later.